Welcome back. We're looking at the increase of racially motivated violence in Northern Ireland, even as traditional tensions between Catholics and Protestants remain relatively calm. Joining me from Belfast are Dr. Esmond Birney, a politician with the Ulster Unionist Party and former member of the Legislative Assembly, and Dr. Peter Sherlow, Director of Education at Queen's University Belfast School of Law, who's written extensively on this subject. Now, before we get back to them, I want to bring in Alex Maskey, the former Lord Mayor of Belfast, who's joining us on the phone. He currently serves in Northern Ireland's Legislative Assembly representing South Belfast as a member of the Sinn Féin party. Mr. Maskey, I want to welcome you and start off by asking, from your perspective, how bad has the issue of the racism and violence become?
Well, we appear to have racism, particularly in South Belfast, which raises its unfortunately ugly head periodically, and obviously the last episode was around the Romanian families who, as you know, were eventually had to leave here and return home under very difficult circumstances. Not that long ago we had a row here which had ensued following a football match which involved people from Poland coming over here who, I believe, some of them actually were here to start trouble, conflict on the streets, but that resulted in quite a number of Polish families being intimidated from their homes. Right. In recent years we had the upsurge of attacks on a whole number of Chinese families and their businesses, so we have cycles of it, and there's always something which sparks it off, or allegedly sparks it off. So unfortunately it is a strain of, I suppose, the other side of the coin of sectarianism, which has been with us for a long time.
Yeah, I wonder actually, Mr. Maskey, with the issue of the Romanians who were sent back, which government authority signed off on that? Of course, the funding of the return of them to Romania, and are you worried at all that it might set a precedence?
Well, you know, the executive here obviously was responsible to help the families get back home, but when you're faced with a situation where such a number of people, including children 5 days old when they were forced from their home, when those people want to go home, well, what should a government do? Refuse to allow them to go home, or refuse to support them to go home? And I mean, I take the point entirely. It's a very, very retrograde step to have to take whenever families feel that they can no longer be safe to live here. Right. I think it's a sad reflection here, but if you're asking me, was the government right to finance their travel home, then I think obviously they were. Those people were frightened of staying here. Okay. What are you going to do, hold them prisoner? I don't think so.
I know, and I know you've been concerned, just quickly, I know you've been concerned that not enough is being done fast enough. What do you want to see? What should be done to support those who've been threatened?
Well, I think there's a number of things that have to happen, because I mean, obviously we have a government here. It's only 2 years in the formation, and we have a government here that many people argued couldn't be formed, but it has been formed. It has made some progress, though that has been limited in many ways. What we need to do, obviously, is to have these political institutions work properly and fully on a spirit of partnership, because of the leading partners in the government don't appear to be willing to share and embrace power sharing or equality. Then obviously that's going to have a very least a negative influence on others within our society. But I'm a great one for saying that we do need government strategies and so on about how we tackle racism and sectarianism, but we don't need to be able to tell political parties and political representatives how they should behave and how they need to give leadership. I mean, nobody ever took me or anybody else for that matter, and I'm only using myself as one example, but no one brought me in the room and said, here's how you have to treat people with respect. It was brought up in the family. It was taught to respect other people, and right. I just think that it's quite disgraceful that we have political parties here and representatives who just don't feel able at all or willing to come out and not only condemn, because putting a statement out to condemn something's just a word, and right. Condemnation would stop problems we never would have had any here. So I just feel that people need to, first of all, if there is a victim of racism or sectarianism, civic leaders and political leaders need to stand shoulder to shoulder with the victim. They need to make sure that the culprits are made fully aware that they are not welcome nor wanted, and that their behaviour has no support. And those are things which are automatically should be done, but unfortunately are not done here.
All right, well, I'm going to thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to bring back in Dr. Sherlow here and ask to answer a question from our live station chat room. David in the US says, what role is the church playing to fight against racism in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think it plays a very significant role, and in many areas, of course, where immigrants are now living, the church has a set of outreach. So in some cases, of course, that has meant that especially Polish people from a Catholic background, have joined congregations of local churches. In some of the Protestant areas, although those who've moved in are actually Catholics, they have been encouraged through outreach work where they've organised football games with locals. They've provided facilities such as youth clubs or creches that can be used by the immigrants that have moved into the city. I think it's very important here that the issue about the Romanians is very important. One of the things that happened in this society in particular was the Romanians became the group who were vilified the most in the local press, and in particularly on one of our shock jock radio stations here, where there were constant debates about the Romanians begging and the Romanians behaving in ways that were seen to be unacceptable, and I say that in speech marks. And one of the reasons for that is that Romanians, unlike other citizens who come here from the European Union, they can come and live here, but they can't receive benefits. Right. So what you actually have is a very visible representation of an immigrant population here, because they were involved in car washing businesses, and some were also involved in basically begging, panhandling in the street. Yeah. And they themselves became, an out-group even in comparison to the other immigrant groups who were here. But the answer to the question is yes, the churches have done quite a bit to help people to come and settle within this society.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Sheila. We've got Carlos on the line from Belfast. I want to try and squeeze that in. Carlos, go ahead. What would you like to ask?
Good evening. I would like just to talk here about the Portuguese community that work in Angola and Portugal, and the Portuguese community being targeted and being victims of sectarian attacks in the past at 10 years ago. I just would like to say that the Portuguese community that is here on our island, it's working, because in our country we don't have the welfare and the benefit system that the people have here in the UK. And the only reason that the Portuguese came here, it's not to run out of poverty. It's because we cannot get jobs in our country.
Carlos, I want to thank you. I'm going to put this to Dr. Burney and ask, essentially, as we just sort of wrap this up, let me ask you, so what you think, from your perspective, can be done to try to actually help reduce the amount of targeting of these communities. And as we've been discussing throughout the show, obviously there is some issues that need to be looked at a community level, and some, I guess, at the government level.
Well, yes, indeed, and Carlos, who just rang in there, I think made an excellent point that we all have to constantly reiterate that the vast bulk of the ethnic minority population here in Northern Ireland, and indeed those who have arrived in the last few years, have come here to make a very valuable and indeed in many ways essential contribution to our economy, to public services provision and so forth. So there is a need for that message to be repeated by political leaders. Obviously there are issues around policing on the streets in terms of giving these communities assurances that their concerns will be addressed and will be addressed rapidly. And I would also say finally, just to sort of give credit where credit is due, in terms of the way that civic society did react to the sad events relating to the Roma and Romanian people about a month ago. Many people gave money to those families, and indeed a church in South Belfast provided them with emergency accommodation for a night. So whilst we are necessarily tonight talking about the sort of a negative side of life in Northern Ireland, there's a lot of good being done, and may there be more of that in the future.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining and taking part, and of course, Dr. Sheila, Dr. Peter Sheila, Dr. Esmond Burney, thank you both for your contributions. I also want to thank Alex Maskey, the former Lord Mayor of Belfast, and former Sinn Féin spokesman on racism, who joined us by phone there at the top of the second half of the show. Thank you very much with your questions too, and for being with us. On the next show, we look at the troop surge in Afghanistan as some in the British public begin to raise their voices in opposition to the war there. And don't forget, you can always follow me and get updates on the show via Twitter, and you can send in questions and comments either by email or by Facebook as well. Join our website for that. That's it from me and the team. We'll see you next time.